Prayer. Lord God, thank you so much for giving us this time together, and bless us as we go about looking at your word. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. As we've looked at 1 Corinthians, letter by Paul to Corinthian church. Yeah, that's why it says to the Corinthians. What's the problem in the Corinthian church?
They're all messed up.
Yeah, a bunch of stuff. Yeah. If you had to sort of crystallize the Corinthian problem, what is it?
You got
arrogance and division.
You got good guys on one side, bad guys on the other.
You got good guys, bad guys. You got
They're split.
All kinds of
divisions. You got
They're fighting over Greek philosophy versus Jewish tradition versus Paul's teaching.
you got all this going on, right? And then, and what does Paul say about the divisions? Because he talks about the big stuff first, and what does he remind the Corinthians with respect to divisions? What does he kind of refocus them on the big issues?
Focus on Christ, not on people who taught.
You gotta focus on Christ, and in particular Christ crucified, because that's really big for Paul. So if you focus on Christ crucified, you're gonna avoid falling into these little bitty minor skirmishes. What does he say about the leaders of the different divisions? Yeah, what does he say? Because he led a group, Apollos led a group. Well, how should the people view those leaders that they're scrapping and fighting about?
As servants of God, one planted, one watered, but it's God that gives the increase.
That it's God's gift. Okay, so that maybe we got to keep our focus on Christ and remember that we're all working together. We may have different perspectives and we may have different talents, but we aren't working against one another. We are working together. Okay, so that's a big thing. And then he starts hitting little issues. And one of the issues that he hits, what are some of them? He talks about
Eating meat sacrificed to idols.
Eating meat sacrificed to idols. And by the way, Kroger has a sale now.
So does Walmart.
Yeah, so does Walmart. Don't worry, they're different kinds. The meat offered to idols, and by the way, we had pork last night. What does it say about eating meat offered to idols?
Go ahead, it's okay.
Go ahead. Well,
Don't ask.
yeah, but it's got an asterisk beside it.
Don't ask.
If it
Don't
bothers
tell.
Okay, first is don't ask, don't tell.
Don't be a stumbling block.
Don't be a stumbling block. So, there are things more important than, whether you're going to have a pulled pork sandwich. It's things like,
Mashed potatoes.
Yeah, like mashed potatoes. You don't want the meat to cause a brother to
Stumble.
So, but what is his perspective on this meat offered to idols in general?
There's no such thing.
We know that,
there's one God,
there's a statue. So, but we don't do it. Yeah, that was, I was speaking in tongues. That's right. Well, I understood it, and you don't want to hear it. So anyway, that it's because gods don't exist. But if it really causes your neighbor or your friend if it screws them up, just don't do it, because there are things more important than meat. And that kind of goes back to focus on the cross. You focus on the cross, focus on your brothers and sisters. That's what's most important. And maybe you should be willing to sacrifice some of the things that you want for their sake. Okay, so he doesn't want to. So that's a problem.
What if you don't like what they're having?
If you don't like what they're having, take it.
He's still fakers.
Yeah. Bring your own bag.
Just say
Matzah. Yeah, big old juicy idol worship steak. But that's one. What else does he talk about?
Marriage.
He talks about marriage. And what does he say about marriage? Well, yeah. If you absolutely have to, you can't avoid it, get married. But if you can handle your, go ahead. Yeah, don't get married. All right, but too late, sweetie. Yeah. So if you can, if you can focus on God again, because the importance is focusing on God. If you can focus on God and not be married, then better not to be married. But if it becomes a distraction, and that's, anything that distracts you from focusing on God, whether it's marriage or whether it's eating meat off the idols, you don't want something to distract you. That your attention, your focus is what's most important. And what else does he talk about in terms of the same focus?
Did he say something about trying to get mates together? I mean, in other words, you don't want to marry somebody that doesn't believe it.
Okay, he goes into it because Paul never has an unwritten thought. So he goes into all these details. That if you're married to a non-believer, and imagine, he's writing to a church that has very definite issues, and so it might be reasonable to assume that in this church with very definite issues, you got some people in the church that are saying, hot dog, this is my way out of a marriage I don't want. They're an unbeliever, therefore I can be godly and get out of this. Again, Paul, no, because you could be a big influence on your non-believing spouse. So God, in other words, God may have put you there for a purpose, and the purpose may be to change your spouse. And I can imagine there were some people in the church that said, because we're talking about human beings. And he wouldn't have said it if it hadn't been an issue.
But God was never married, so he knows you can't change it. I mean, he should have known you can't change it.
Yeah.
So,
well,
that's a mark against God.
So, that's a point that, when we're before the judgment seat,
I will tell him.
point that out. That'll be your question. My question, of course, my question, you've shared it before, right? Why doesn't hot dogs, why doesn't tuna taste good with ketchup? That's my question. Why doesn't tuna taste good with ketchup?
And I found out the question of why is there 8 buns in a package and only 6 hot dogs.
Oh.
I did on the internet.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Okay, so you don't need to ask God that.
No.
You've done it after. But I want to know that tuna would be a perfect food. If it, didn't take, you got to put mayonnaise, and mayonnaise is full of fat. So you eat tuna with mayonnaise, which negates the fat. You got all this fat. If you could eat it with ketchup, it would be perfect, right? Low fat, everybody would be healthy.
Olive oil.
But then you got to put oil on it. Yeah, I need to be busy. I got too much time. So, all right. So, what are other issues? What are some other issues?
Lord's Supper being.
Lord's Supper. The Corinthians have an interesting view of the Lord's Supper.
It's
Free for all.
Yeah,
as fast as you can.
that's right. The rich people who bring the good stuff get there early and pig out, and they come hungry. Make sure you come to the Lord's Supper hungry. And they eat too much and they drink too much, and the poor people get nothing. And Paul says, what are you thinking? This is not what it's about. The focus should be on
Christ.
Yes. All right. Now, he spent a lot of time, 3 chapters, talking about one particular issue. Oh, well, yeah, he didn't spend 3 chapters on that, but we did have a guy that was shacking out with his mother-in-law. That was not a spiritual gift.
No.
Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah. that had nothing to do with the spirit. We needed a break there somewhere. He says turn him over to the police because obviously that guy is nuts, and
Well, he was breaking the law.
breaking the law.
Yeah.
So you don't want to do that.
Yeah, you don't want people in the church having to go out to outside people to tell them what to do.
Exactly. And you don't want them shacking up with that mother-in-law.
Yeah, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Reckless.
That's kind of problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
Boy,
Yeah,
you're really feeling it, Sandy. I'm looking at the pace and it's, it is dramatic. It's like eating tuna with ketchup.
Okay.
So all right, so we got that. Spiritual gifts. Spends a lot of time on spiritual gifts. And what was the issue, would appear to be the issue on spiritual gifts?
Don't be jealous of what you need.
Okay, one, you had people in the church that were jealous of other gifts. And is that something that is pertinent today?
Oh,
I
yeah.
really think it is. No, that's not. In fact, it's as a good, what's that?
Keeping up with the judgment.
Well, and you can do that spiritually. And by the way, you don't know this? This is an incredibly important day. You know what today is?
Coco took off.
Coco, well, she's in this room.
Yeah, she's.
You know what today is? Should be a national.
Is it your birthday?
No,
No, that should be a national holiday. But I'll tell you, Sandy, when I was little, they closed the schools on my birthday. The schools were always closed on my birthday.
Mine too.
Yeah. But today is John Calvin's birthday. John Calvin. Now, I did post a Calvin quote because today is John Calvin's birthday. And being a Calvinist, a good Calvinist, Calvinists have this wonderful view of vocation, which really is very consistent with what Paul wrote about spiritual gifts. That every vocation is equal. It's different in terms of what it does and the goals, but in terms of status in the sight of God, all the vocations, all the work are equal. So you don't aspire to be. You do what you're equipped to do, and be happy with it. But also, because he's got a sense of should be compensated for it. So it's not like you should just be a drudge. If you're a really good plumber, God's given you the gift, but you don't like to speak in public, and you're not a real good speaker anyway. Maybe you shouldn't say, "Oh, I want to be a preacher." Be the best plumber you could possibly be, and that's kind of what Paul is saying. Do what you do. God has given you the ability to do. Don't assume, and it's not like don't aspire to the higher gifts. It's don't assume that the gifts are higher, because you need these gifts. And the people that think they have high gifts, I'll guarantee you, when my toilet is leaking, I can pray and pray and pray, but I better find somebody that knows how to handle a wrench, because it ain't gonna work. I can tell you that from experience. It is not gonna. You cannot insult a toilet. I can tell you that too. So you need to have somebody able to fix it. So we don't aspire. And as we deal with those gifts, what does Paul say should be our sort of guiding principle?
To glorify God and to edify the body.
Okay, we are to edify the body. What does edify the body mean? What does the word edify mean?
Encourage.
Excellent question. Encourage, build up.
Build up.
Yeah, build up. We're to build up. We're to build up the body, make it stronger, right? We're to glorify God, and if we adopt as our kind of, I've been talking about Jesus as a focus, but if we adopt an attitude or make a decision in our life, what decision does Paul challenge us to make in order to live lives that glorify God and edify
The
God?
right decisions.
What does he, how do we get there? What does he challenge us to do in this section where he talks about spiritual gifts? To do what he wants us to do. What's the decision we need to make?
Could be listening to messages.
Well, true.
Let's focus on Christ.
True.
Live by-
Remember, right in the middle, in chapters 12 through 14, he talks about spiritual gifts. And then in the middle of 12 through 14, you got 13, he talks about love. You know, that you make the decision that you're gonna love. And if you make the decision that you're gonna love, a lot of this other stuff is just gonna fall in place. And then he spends a whole chapter dealing with,
She can't get up the steps.
what do you want?
She's contemplating going up the steps.
You want to go up and say, you want to be on stage?
Star of the show.
She couldn't climb the steps.
Yeah.
Okay, you really want to be out there?
She tried,
She'll be
Okay.
getting you.
Well, so the if we love, we'll be okay.
She's checking
If
out.
we love, we'll be okay. And then last week we looked at what? What did we look at last week? Which was pretty important last week.
The resurrection.
Okay, good. We looked at the resurrection. And resurrection was evidently what was happening in the church. What was happening in the church? Okay, you had some people that didn't believe in the resurrection of the dead. And why would they not have believed in the resurrection of the dead?
Maybe because they weren't there to see it.
Well, they weren't there. Now, when we say resurrection of the dead, not talking about the resurrection of Jesus. They all believed in the resurrection of Jesus, because you had to. They didn't believe that we would be raised, that the resurrection applies to us.
They didn't believe in a physical resurrection of the body.
Right.
Because of Neoplatonism.
Yeah, the Greek idea that they accepted was that remember when we talk about it, the spiritual is better. And so they would say the body is a shell that contains the soul. The temporal body contains the immortal soul. And when the temporal body dies, the immortal soul is released and then goes to God or somewhere and lives eternally. And if that's the case, if the body is a shell and the soul is released to be with God, why is the resurrection of the dead a problem?
Because they can't see it. There's
There's no body, and why would you want it? You know, it's like cutting the grass. You know, when you cut the grass, you know, and it's this hot, you cut the grass and it's hot, and you're sweaty, and you get inside, and your clothes are soaking wet, and you say, man, I'm going to take a shower. And so you take a shower, and you look at the pile of wet, dirty, sweaty clothes, and you do what with them? You throw them in the wash. What do you not do with them? Put them back on. You don't put them back on. And if the immortal soul finally escapes this shell that gets sick and decays and rots and does horrible things, you finally have rid yourself from this horrible thing that we're stuck in. Why in heaven's name would we want
To put it back
on? You know, we spend a lifetime getting away from it. We don't want to put it back on. And that's what the Platonist was saying. And that's what a lot of people in the Corinthian church believed. A lot of Christians believed it then. A lot of Christians believe it now. You know, so this is what was believed. You know, so Paul is saying that evidently this teaching is bouncing around in the Corinthian church. Now, what does Paul say is the problem if I say, there's no resurrection. You know, when we die, our souls escape and they float around and do something else. You know, but there's no resurrection. Why does Paul say that is a big problem?
Because then Jesus wasn't resurrected physically.
Then Jesus wasn't resurrected. Or he could have put it another way. Then why would Jesus be resurrected? That would be what? Stupid. Why would Jesus be resurrected from the dead, right? Physically resurrected. No question he was physically resurrected. You could feel the holes. in his hand. He ate fish, for crying out loud. He was physically raised. Why would he do that? Why would God do that if there's no resurrection of the dead? It doesn't make sense. If he was spiritually raised, okay, but he wasn't. He was physically raised. It doesn't make sense. It also means if Jesus wasn't physically raised from the dead, what can you say about Paul's teaching?
It's false.
Yeah, why is it false?
Because
Yeah, he told a lie. He told a lie. And if he told a lie about the resurrection, then he could tell a lie about it. One of my guilty pleasures is watching Judge Judy. I like to watch it. Do you ever watch Judge Judy?
Yeah.
She says a lot of things. If you tell the truth, you don't need a good memory. And one that I've told my daughter many times, how you can tell when a teenage girl is lying. Her lips are moving. But one of the things that she says is when somebody lies to her, she says, all you have to do is lie to me one time. And if you lie to me, then I don't believe what you say after.
I like when she says, shh, I'm talking.
I do too. Man, she's tough.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's what Paul is saying. Look, if you lie to me, or if I'm lying to you, you shouldn't trust me. You should trust me. If I lie about this, man, I'll lie about anything. Which is human. But then Paul says, what about the resurrection? It happened. The resurrection of Jesus Christ happened. That's real. I'm not lying to you, which means what? If the resurrection of Jesus is real, then our resurrection is real too. The reverse is also true. If I'm lying about the resurrection, I'm lying about everything. But if I'm telling you the truth, that means our resurrection is going to happen as well. And he goes into a lot of detail about the resurrection, right? And what does he say about the resurrection? What does he say about it? How does he talk about it?
the perishable is putting on the imperishable.
Okay. So again, anticipating questions in the back of the room. When is the resurrection going to be like?
We will not all sleep or die physically, but we will all change.
Which means if we will not all, and I think, that sleep business is really cool because he talks about it in Romans as well. And I think that when Paul uses the word sleep, which by the way is not necessarily a Greek rhetorical, written habit. I mean, the Greeks didn't tend to equate death and sleep. So sleep wasn't an image they used to talk about death. It wasn't a euphemism for death. That sleep wasn't. But Paul uses sleep to talk about death. I think that's really significant because I think that's the way Paul viewed it. I think that's the way Paul viewed death in a very profound way. And that's a very Jewish way to view death. That when you die, it is like
Soul sleep.
soul sleep, falling asleep. And what happens when the trumpet sounds? You wake up. Boom. You wake up. Yeah. Well, and I've said before, I think I didn't really understand it until I had surgery. And man, when they put you under, you could be under for 6 months, and you wouldn't know. Time is irrelevant. You go under, and the next conscious moment, you're awake. And I think that's how Paul viewed. I don't think he'd had surgery, so I don't think he'd experienced. But I think that's synonymous with how Paul viewed death and sleep as being similar. That you go to sleep, and then your next conscious moment, he says, twinkling of an eye, boom, you're the resurrection of the dead. So you're not waiting. It's not like you're hanging out until. Yeah. Well, and that's kind of the family circus view. Looking down, Grandpa and little Jimmy, and okay, that's comforting. But if you push it, that means Grandpa's going to be out there a long time. Just hanging out on that cloud. Do you really want to be hanging out on a cloud all that time? Yeah, it's kind of boring. You know, I don't want to wear sandals. You know, I like pants. I don't want to wear robes. You know, his grandfather does he have underwear? I don't know. You know, that's important to me. You know, so,
Well, you have long sleeves.
yeah, that's right. I have long sleeves. He won't be having cufflinks. I know. You know, so, but you know, Paul says quickly that. But somebody would say, you know, like we've talked about, you know, that going to ask, well, what happens? You know, my neighbor was eaten by a shark. You know, my neighbor was eaten by a shark. Good Christian man eaten by a shark. Resurrection is dead. You know, what's going to be raised? Because he was eaten by a shark. And Paul says, boy, are you stupid. You know, and in a sense, that's what he does. He does say, you know, what a dumb thing to ask, because we are going to be changed. The mortal will what?
Put on immortality.
Put on immortality. The perishable will put on imperishability. Now, what does that mean? I don't know. What did Paul think it meant? I don't know. I don't think he thought it meant anything. It's just that we're talking about what?
Change.
Change, and a change of a mysterious way. You know, a mysterious change. Okay? So this is what's going to occur. Boom, we're going to be raised. And what's important isn't what the body's going to look like. In fact, I think everybody will look like Sandy. Personally. Yeah, everybody will look like Sandy except 4 or 5 people. And that's going to get really confusing. What's that? Well, they made all Sandy 1, Sandy 2. You know, and the ones who aren't named, a few that aren't named Sandy, will generally have to wait while Sandy picks them up. She'll forget. So but we're going to be raised. What's important isn't what we're going to look like, because who cares what we look like? We got to look better than we do now. You know, we're going to look better than we do. What's important is what?
That will change.
Yeah, that will change what's happening. Death has been swallowed up. And why does death get swallowed up with his resurrection?
Because sin brought death.
Sin brings death, and once the kingdom has come, sin is irrelevant. Sin is irrelevant. Because we now have perfect freedom, therefore we don't have to choose something that occurred in the story of the garden, where Adam and Eve had to choose between good and evil. We don't have to do that anymore, because good is the only possibility. That becomes complete freedom. We're not bound to make that choice. And so Paul says, okay, hot dog, resurrection occurred, but he doesn't say hot dog. But resurrection has occurred. We will be changed, and this is good news. And then he says, tell people about this, right? All right, so we've got all of his big issues have been covered, right? So we assume that the Corinthians have heard it all, and now the Corinthians are thinking right? So all the problems in the Corinthian church have now been solved.
Not really. They still have to take the offline.
They will, in 2 Corinthians, and even in part of 2 Corinthians, it may be 2 letters, it's fairly clear that at least the second part of 2 Corinthians, could be the whole letter, but certainly the second part of 2 Corinthians is a letter that follows this one, and after his first letter, things have calmed down in the Corinthian church, right? No, they've gotten worse. And the second part of the letter, Paul is laying them out. You know, it's like I tried to be nice. Now I'm gonna tell you the truth, and it is not pretty or pleasant. And I think we may get an allusion to it in even what he says at the end of 1 Corinthians. All right. So anyway, we've got all that done. In chapter 16, we're coming down to the conclusion. He's doing what everybody does when they get to the end of the letter. What do you do when you get to the end of the letter?
Take an offering.
What's that? Yeah, that's right. You had taken them. That's what every kid in college does at the end of the letter. You kind of tie up loose ends, right? You cover the little stuff that you haven't gotten around to. And one of the things that Paul wants to tie up is something about a collection. And what is a collection? What's he talking about with this collection he's taking? This is a collection for whose benefit?
I think the Jews.
Okay, yeah. He talks about it's a collection for the saints.
Right.
Okay, now who are the saints? Yeah, they're followers of Christ, those who've been set apart, and they're Jews living in Jerusalem. Luke alludes to it. In fact, Luke indicates in Acts that is Paul's principal job when he was sent out, is to collect money for and supplies for the saints in Jerusalem. Because not only are they facing pressure, when you read Acts, it almost sounds like they're the dominant force now in Jerusalem. But they talk about a famine, and so that they need food. Okay, so he reminds the Corinthians of the collection he's taken, and what instructions does he offer with respect to this collection?
First, that they should prepare for it.
Yeah, he talks about how to do it, right? And he's going to follow a pattern he established where?
Galatians.
In the Galatian churches. So we're going to follow that template. And how does he encourage them? Because he's serious about this collection. Because he needs to take something back. That was sort of his job, to collect for Christians that are hungry in Jerusalem. What does he recommend that the Corinthians do so that the collection is there?
Give it on the first.
Yeah. Take the first day of the week. Maybe you should set aside some of the extra, right? Man, if she were here Sunday morning when I'm preaching, I would be done. Nobody would pay attention at all. She's having a great time with that little Lego. She throws it in the air.
She should be here also.
She's just fun all the time. So you should collect it. Now, why would he say that? Why would it be a good idea if every week you set aside extra? Why is that a good idea? Yeah, well, because if you don't, that means when I get there, what are we going to have to do?
Take the collection.
We're going to have to take up an offering, and if I try to take up an offering and you haven't put anything aside, you ain't going to have much. We all know that. If you do that, but if you set a little bit aside, then when I get there, then I'll be able to take the gift to Jerusalem. Okay. He shifts topics a little bit. So he talks about the offering. Shifts topics in verse 5. What did he talk about in verse 5? And Rick, by the way, thank you for waxing the floor. Yeah, she is having a blast.
She should sleep with tonight.
She certainly should.
She's buffing it for you.
That reminds me, I was talking about the commercial. Have y'all seen that commercial of the guys breaking into the house? And they see the German Shepherd, and the German Shepherd comes up and
Drops
the ball in front of them. I think that's selling alarm systems. Okay, so he shifts topics. So we've talked about the offering. What does he shift in verse 5?
His travel plans.
Okay, his travel plans. And what does he plan to do?
He's going to Macedonia.
He's going to Macedonia. Okay, where's Macedonia?
He's going to
Yeah, right north of Greece. So he's going to Macedonia, He's going to pass through. What's he going to do? Now, how does that relate to the Corinthians?
Then he'll stop here.
Yeah, I'll be in the neighborhood. I'll stop for a short visit. How long does he plan to be there?
Maybe
All winter.
So you better put some money aside to feed all.
Yeah, I'm going to be there for the winter. Boy, that's what I'm hoping the in-laws write me and say I'm coming and be a short visit from December through April. Why would he plan to winter? Why would he plan to winter in Corinth? Why would that make sense?
Because traveling by sea in the wintertime isn't a good idea.
Traveling, the winter is horrible
Winters are terrible.
to travel through the Mediterranean. So you don't want to be sailing
he's gonna climb
back
on
to Asia
747.
Minor in the winter.
And he can also insert himself into the
He can reestablish some things. Okay. So his plan is then to do what? Okay, he's going to be to Macedonia and going to head, and he suggests that he's facing some opposition. Right? Yeah, there's some adversaries. All right, so we've talked about this. What does he say in verse 10?
That Timothy's coming.
Okay, Timothy's coming.
Make him
Now,
welcome.
now who is Timothy? Who is Timothy?
Timothy traveled with him.
Yeah, Timothy travels with Paul.
Sort of like an aide or
That's
young guy.
Right? And, he's even mentioned in, Luke evidently knew about him because he was mentioned in Acts. So he was like a secretary or an aide, or he traveled with Paul. And Paul's in where? Where's Paul? Where does Paul say? He's in Ephesus, right? And so, but Timothy is going to come over, and he's going to visit. Now, what does he say concerning Timothy?
Take it. There's nothing to fear.
Make sure Timothy has nothing to fear. Now, why would he say that? Why would he say that to the Corinthians when he gets there? Make sure that Timothy doesn't have any reason to be afraid.
Well,
Don't be
because of his
intimidated.
age and trying to continue what Paul's doing, they may consider it.
Timothy is younger, so they could be dumping on him because of age. He's associated with Paul, and remember what's happening in this church. You got divisions, and you got some people that don't like Paul. So this is Paul's way of saying, kind of fix your act before Timothy gets here. We don't want him facing opposition and reason to be afraid. Okay. In fact, when it's time to go, as a church, you should do what? Be able to send him out with peace. So, give him a good visit.
Yeah.
All right. Now, who does he mention in verse 12? Now, he mentions Apollos. And what does he call Apollos? Okay, calls brother. Now, this is kind of a, and what else does he say? What did Paul do with respect to Apollos?
That he urged him to come to Corinth.
Okay. What was his response?
Paul wasn't here.
What's that?
Paul didn't want to go at that time.
Okay. Well, he strongly urged, I strongly urged him to visit you with the other brothers, but
Wasn't
He
his
was
intention
unwilling.
to come?
he didn't want to come. Okay. And he said what?
He came on an opportunity.
Yeah, he'd come when the opportunity came. Now, Apollos could be the same Apollos, could be. Could be, Apollos was not an unusual name. If somebody said, if Paul's writing and it said, I encourage John to come to church with me, but he said maybe next week, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? Yeah. You know exactly what I'm talking about.
No, we were all named Sandy.
Then we're all named Sandy. That's coming later. But so to assume that it's the only person named Apollos isn't necessarily accurate. if he is talking about the same Apollos, though, it's really interesting. Paul's not stupid. What does that little conversation, and I think he is talking about the same one. What does this little conversation, how might it elevate Paul a little bit?
Because it appears Apollos wasn't willing to come right then, but when it suited him.
Yes. It doesn't put Apollos in the best light. For one, it appears as though that Paul is giving Apollos instructions, which would put their relative position where?
Paul was his boss.
Paul is a little higher than Apollos. And also, Apollos isn't coming to see you. You know, I am really looking forward to seeing you. And I may spend all winter with you. I tried to get Apollos to come, and Apollos said, well, not right now. I'll get back to you. It looks as though Apollos is not quite as enthused to come. Now, you say, oh, Paul would do that.
Maybe they're
But
like the way
Paul does do that. Paul does do that.
So they can also look at it the other way too. Well, Paul should have more influence over Apollos.
Well, that's right. That's right. And that he is not the authority.
It's not that he didn't want to come. I should have said, you're going.
Yeah. It certainly could. If Paul included it, and it's the same Apollos, I'm thinking there's a reason why. And Paul seldom tried to undercut himself. Included things that undercut himself. And why would Paul be very careful not to undercut himself in any area?
You lose confidence.
Yeah, you lose confidence. Paul, remember we talked about it. It's one thing to be humble, and humility is nice. But Paul is fighting for the heart and soul of Christianity. If he says, well, the other guys may be right, it's just a matter of an opinion, what's going to happen to the Christian faith?
It's going to go downhill.
It's going to go downhill. Why is it going to go downhill?
Because if he can't believe in it, then nobody.
Well, yeah, and everybody's going to have their own ideas. Yeah, you're going to have all kinds of ideas. Some people have suggested, in fact, and not in a positive way, that one of the problems with the printing press was a curse to Christianity. It was a horrible thing for Christianity. Terrible thing, the printing press. What was the first book printed by the printing press? Satan's Guide to Life. No, it wasn't. What was the first book printed? The Bible. There are people who have written the worst thing that could have happened to Christianity. The worst thing that could have happened to Christianity. Worst thing. Why?
That's how you're going to get
Why would somebody, and I don't agree, of course, but why might somebody say that was the worst thing that could happen to Christianity?
Because false information.
Okay, let's build on that. I got a Bible, right? This printed in Latin. Okay?
I can't.
Yeah, I can't read Latin. Printed in Latin. Okay, but if I can print it in Latin, and Latin uses the Latin alphabet. What other languages use a Latin alphabet?
Most of them.
Most Western languages, like English, like French, like Italian, like Spanish. Okay, all German, all of them are using Latin-based letters. I mean, that's what we use the Latin-based letters, and the sounds those letters represent. So if I can print a book in Latin, if I'm copying it by hand, I don't have time to copy a book in German. Because I got to get as many Latin versions out there as possible, because that's the language of culture and education. But if I can print 1,000 books using movable type, just move them around, I can print Bibles in all kinds of, and that's called vernacular. I could start printing Bibles in different languages, right? Worst thing could happen to Christianity. Worst thing. Right? Martin Luther comes up and says, here's the Bible, right? Calvin, his birthday. Did I mention his birthday? Here's a Bible. printed in your language. Which means, what can you do with it now? You can read it. And you can learn how to read, because what's amazing is the letters make sounds. So even if you don't know how to read it, you can read the letters out loud, the sounds of the letters, and come up with the words. The words. It's not a pentagram, like Chinese. You can't read Chinese phonetically, but you can with Latin letters. You can sound out the words. So you can read the Bible, and the more you do it, the easier it's going to be. Worst thing that could have happened to Christianity. Why?
Because you're going to start interpreting.
Man, I'm giving each of you a Bible and sending you out to read it.
Can't
And we're going to talk about 1 Corinthians, and what's going to happen?
Different.
We're going to have how many different opinions? Jeez Louise! And I'm telling you, read it. And I'm reading, I said, that's not what I'm seeing here.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you've got all these different ideas floating around. Before the printing press, how many churches did you have in the West? You had one. After the printing press, how many churches did you have in the West? Well, let's see. How many churches do we have now? Denominations. Jeez Louise. It's like that ticker on, the debt. And you look at that thing, it goes up, keeps on going up, the national debt. That's like denominations. You look at the ticker, and it keeps on going up every day. Because everybody's, starts their own church, because everybody does what? Has their own interpretation. Because what the Bible does when it's printed, it's telling people, read it and interpret it. Before, in week maybe, and all of a sudden, who loses? What ends up happening to the interpretation that used to be controlled by the church? Controlled the interpretation. Therefore, there was one interpretation. Now there's could be as many interpretations as readers, and so you end up with hundreds of Protestant denominations. Because everybody is saying, well, I don't know the way I read communion. I don't know the way I read this. And you start breaking into different groups. Okay, so you like that, didn't you? Yeah, okay. All right, so Paul is, Timothy needs to be a good visit. Apollos, maybe he's undercutting. I don't even remember why I started on that. There was a reason in my mind. I don't know. I know. Because Paul was, he had to establish what Christianity was all about. He couldn't have people coming up with 100 different interpretations. It was really important. Maybe some people might say now that maybe we don't need 500 different interpretations of Scripture. Okay.
I think we take her.
Oh, I'm fine.
She might have to go.
Well, she won't when I'm holding her.
Oh.
Yeah. We'll be good. We'll be good.
Isn't that sweet?
Yes. Okay. So now he's done that. How does he? What are his final commandments? How does he bring this letter home?
He says, let all that you do be done with love.
Okay, you got to keep alert, right? Because it's final commands, right? In verse, what is it? Verse 13?
13.
Yeah, he says, keep alert. Now, what does that mean?
Stay with, carry on.
Watchful.
Keep watchful. Now, why for Paul is that particularly important that you have to keep alert?
Be done with love.
Because somebody might come and try to influence you in another way.
Well, true. Somebody might come and influence you with, why is it so important that you better keep alert right now? Christ, that's it. Christ could be here tomorrow, and if you're not alert,
You're going to go the wrong way.
you're going to go the wrong way. Stand firm in the faith. What does that mean? Know who you trust. Know who you trust. Be courageous.
Be brave with it.
You got to be brave because what?
Because God's coming.
Well, God's coming. What else?
All the chapters
There's going to be a lot of
A lot of
detractors.
problems coming along.
There's going to be a lot of people inside and outside the church that are going to dump on you. So don't believe that this is going to be easy, that you can just sit back. You got to have some really courage. And not only courage, you got to have some strength. Because it's going to take strength to stand firm and resist. But above all, love. And what is love?
God's love.
Not causing somebody else to stumble.
Yeah, not causing. Remember, love, he just
Building
deals
them
with
up.
it in the 13th chapter.
Yeah.
You know, love is
The greatest.
going to be the thing that lasts. Love is not a feeling. Love is not a feeling. Love
It's
is
an action.
Is an action. Is a decision. Decision to act. Love is not being envious, not being arrogant, not being rude. That's what love is. You know, love is being supportive. That's what love is. Love isn't liking. Love is treating other people right. I mean, that's what love, that's what agape is. And because he's defined it. He already defined it. And I want you to notice that even in this last thing, he's bringing in all these themes that he's kind of talking about. You know, that this love which sets in the center of the spiritual gift business. He's kind of pulling it all together. Specifically, what does he want him to do? Now he is really in the final throes of the letter. Specifically, what does he want him to do?
Welcome, fellow servants of Christ.
Okay. I'm going to tell you some particular people that I want you to welcome. Okay? And he's very specific about the names. Now, what does he want to accomplish? What do you think he wants to accomplish in this? What does he want to accomplish by mentioning these people? I mean, why does he mention? He didn't have to mention. Paper's expensive. Mentioning it meant
They're important.
The people he's talking to them about.
yeah. Why would he mention it? Include this in the
To
letter.
show that he loved them and they loved him.
Oh, that there's a connection.
And what that meant.
And then he ends the letter by saying what? How does he end this letter?
Give recognition to such.
Okay. That all the churches in Asia send their greeting. Now, why would he mention all the churches? When the churches in Asia send their greeting. Why would he do that? What is he communicating to the Corinthians by saying the churches in Asia send their greeting?
You're not an island. You're not alone.
You are not. You are part of something bigger.
Than
You-
your penny.
Exactly. That's exactly. And he mentions two people evidently the Corinthians must know something about, because he mentions Priscilla and Aquila, you know, which we ran into in Acts when we looked at Acts. Everybody sends a greeting, and then how does he close his letter to the Corinthians?
Sends his love to all of them.
Sends his love to all of them, and you should know, it's all like he's saying, you should know I'm sending my love. This is personal. Because what does he do at the very end? Which is kind of cool. What does he do at the very end?
My love be with you all in Christ Jesus.
Right? A little before that, what does he say he's doing?
He's writing it by himself, not scribe.
This I really want you to know is coming from me.
My signature.
Yes, that is the signature. I'm not gonna have the scribe write this. I'm writing it with my own hand. This is my own handwriting. How would they be able to tell that it's his own handwriting?
Probably looks a lot different.
Looks a lot different. Remember I told you, one of the things with scribes, is they were
detailed in their writing.
that's right. They were really little. Their writing was really small because what they were writing on was so valuable. You didn't want to waste space. So a scribe had gotten down with the pens they were using. They could, that's exactly right. And it was, remember I told you, all letters, no separation of words, just lines of letters that you had to have a scribe read it. when Paul says, I'm writing this with my own hand, my assumption would be, and in fact he says it in another letter,
Large.
the letters are larger, because evidently Paul his eyesight wasn't great. And so the letters are bigger. Paul's letters are bigger. So this is so important. And see, we kind of miss that, you know. We get a card and somebody writes on the bottom, you know, with their own hand, and you say, oh, isn't that nice? This was not just, oh, isn't that nice? This is economic. You know, this is expensive. Even those couple of lines meant something very valuable was being used to convey something that was very personal. And so and then Paul ends it. Now, when we look at the whole letter, what was Paul's, sort of bringing it all together, what was Paul's intention?
He wanted to unify the church in Christ.
Okay, he wants to unify the church in Christ. That, unfortunately, that has absolutely no application nowadays. Because the church is already unified, and there is absolutely no reason for us to hear a letter
No.
about
What
you.
planet do you live on?
Then what if this is still an issue? If this is still an issue, what do we do with this Corinthian letter? Because there's a lot of specifics in here that don't apply. You know, true, we still eat meat worship, offered idols, like the Kroger sale. We already talked about that, so that's still pertinent. And I know, in fact, a person in this congregation who is even now dating his mother-in-law, but I don't want to get into that. You know, because that's a little, I don't want to embarrass him by sharing that. What can we do? What should we do with this letter? What can be done with this letter? As I'm trying to look as scholarly and casual as I can,
With a dog,
with a dog on my shoulder.
We need to apply principles to today's church.
Such as.
Well, I have been in churches that split because there was a disagreement over the color of the carpet to be installed. I'd say that the principle here, that division is bad. I mean, would you say that if they're that focused on the carpet, that they're focused on Christ?
Well, no, but that's a pretty important issue. Okay.
No.
Yes, right. So churches.
And that's a pretty benign example.
Right.
Sad.
Sad, and there are others that are even sadder, because some of the other issues that cause, you know, not only churches to divide, but people, communities to divide. And it doesn't have to be an official division. It can be, you know, really, really personal. What is Paul challenging then the Corinthians to do?
Love.
Yeah, to get past those things
Focus on
and
Christ.
focus on the Christ and the Christ on Christ crucified. And that, and don't come to communion hungry. Right?
We're too far from Sunday.
Don't come to communion.
The little wafer we want for.
Well,
Seriously, if even 50%, 75% of the people in church was focused on those two things, loving and focusing on Christ, the church would be so powerful, it could not help but transform the society around it.
absolutely. Absolutely. Not only would they become internally incredibly strong, and that becomes the bottom line. You know, as long as the church is splintered, the church is weak. Satan wins when the church is splintered. You know, when we're fighting over, you know, issues that aren't central to Christ. But then, as soon as I say that, someone will say, "Well, this issue is central to Christ." Well, there's a professor at Pittsburgh Seminary. His name is Van Drell, and he was Dutch Reformed. And Rob Stark and some of y'all know Rob, knew Rob. He was on the board of directors at Pittsburgh Seminary, and he got to know Edwin Vandrill really well. And I remember one time he asked me to come to lunch with him in Pittsburgh, and so I went to lunch with him. He paid, so I was happy to go. But we had lunch together, and Rob, because that's when the homosexuality was a huge deal. It's still a big deal, but it's not as quite as big within the church as it was about 5-6 years ago. And they asked, because it was a professor at the Pittsburgh Seminary that was very adamant on, that this is, I'm leaving the denomination. Where I'm going. I don't know if he went or not, but he was sort of the leader of the other side. And Rob asked Vandrill, what would it take? What would it take to leave the church? What would it take to leave the church? And I remember asking him. And he said, I can't, because Rob would think about that. Vandrill said, if the church ceases to focus on Jesus Christ and ceases to teach love for neighbor, I'd have to leave. I would have to leave. Anything short of that, we're a community. I'll work within that community. I may not agree with what's done. He says, I may not agree with what the church chooses to do. And I may have to work to get the church to revise and change. But I would stay in it unless the church no longer focused on Christ. And this was like 6 years ago. I still remember that, which means it made a difference to me. Because people leave churches all the time. And leave one church, go to another church, leave that church, go to another one, for a lot of reasons. What Vandrill said has stuck with me. If the church no longer proclaims Jesus Christ, no longer focuses on Christ and love, then I'd have to leave. Maybe that's what Paul is kind of getting at in the Corinthian letter. That maybe we need to put aside those things that often cause Christians to find the place that's most comfortable. That maybe we need to have differences. Maybe the differences are good. Because maybe through the differences we're able to do more for Christ than if we're all the same. So, any questions about the letter? And I hope that was a very sober, serious ending. Was it effective having a dog on my shoulder? Did that undercut the?
Well, we can see the love.
That was the love.
That it showed the love. Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Understand in the back of my mind, although I was pretty confident in saying when I pick her up, there's no issue. I am very much conscious. Oh,
As long as your shirt isn't black.
We can tell it's not the first time.
that I've held her. Yeah, she kind of
She
relaxes a little
absolutely
bit.
trusts you.
Oh,
She
absolutely.
really does.
When I was, when Maggie was a little baby, and I'm thinking no more than 1 year old. If she's one, in fact, I don't even think she's one because I don't think she was walking. So she was little. I was in Virginia. Debbie and I moved to Virginia, and I was teaching school at Buckingham County High School. But I also wanted to stay involved in the church. And so I was going to be received in the Presbytery of Piedmont in Virginia. They were going to receive me. And Northern Presbyteries, this has more to do with history than anything else, or it's easier to join, for a minister to join a presbytery up north. Down south, they can be really tough. When I was in New Orleans, I was in the Presbytery of South Louisiana, And they had, and this is a person ordained as a minister. And you get the person who's going to join the presbytery has to appear in front of the body. And anybody in the body can ask any question they want of the person joining. Any question they want. Any. And I remember down in South Louisiana, now this was like 40 years ago, a guy asked, 35 years ago, guy asked a minister who was already ordained, so it's not for ordination, he was just going to become a part. What contemporary theologian had been most influential to? And he talked about 5 minutes on how a theologian named Karl Barth, who died in 1968, how he had been really, really influential. And we're talking about in the 80s. Had been really influential in his theology. And by the way, very influential in mine, too. And after he finished, the man said, "You misunderstood my question. I asked for a contemporary theologian. Because in 1985, 1968 wasn't close enough. He wanted a contemporary." And the guy stumbled and hemmed and hawed, and he wouldn't approve, along with other answers. But they voted no, and he'd already been called. He had a church that was interested, who had called him, and the presbytery said, "We won't accept it. We won't receive it, because we don't believe he's qualified to be a Presbyterian minister in this area." So they were really tough. Well, I'm going before this presbytery, and like I said, this is kind of tough. So I'm sitting there, and there are 3 guys going to be received, and they've approved me to the committee on ministry approved. So I've got to be and answer questions, and I've got Maggie. Debbie is somewhere, so I have Maggie at this meeting, and I remember we're in this cafeteria, and I'm sitting in the back. And I am wearing my best suit. It is a beautiful suit. And she's on the table. I've got her sitting on the table. It's covered with white paper. And the first guy is a former Lutheran minister who wants to is now Presbyterian, wants to join the Presbytery. And they are grilling him. I mean, come from the floor. They are asking all kinds of questions that are really tough questions for him. And I'm sitting there, and Maggie's starting to get fussy a little bit. So I, take her in my lap because I want to calm her down. And it is very unpleasant and uncomfortable. And one is a confrontation with one who believes his answers were too Lutheran and not Calvinistic enough. And it was unpleasant. And I'm sitting there listening thinking, oh my gosh, I'm in big trouble. If they ask me these way, I'm in big, big trouble. But it's an amazing thing because, and I think it's, sometimes when the pressure is the most intense, you feel a sense of peace. All of a sudden you feel a sense of peace. And almost like an inner warmth. Only it wasn't an inner warmth. It was an outer warmth. And I look at Maggie, and Maggie smiles at me. And she now looks very peaceful. And when I'm looking down, I hear my name called to go up front. And see, I'm in the back. So I have to walk in front of all the colleagues who will be voting in my new suit. And by the way, just in case you wanted to know, it was tan. It was a tan suit. It was not a dark blue suit. It was a light tan suit. And maybe if I'd had her on my knee, it would have been all right, but I had her right in my lap. And so I'm walking up the aisle. Now, I knew some people there who were going to watch after. And I'm going up the aisle. And I get to the front. And they've introduced me. And the first thing I say is, before I entertain any questions, I've got to tell you, it's not because I'm nervous. My daughter was on my lap, and she is very relaxed now. And one guy asked a question about, I don't know where I was born. And then they approved me. So I think they felt so sorry for me. So sorry for me. Like one person asked, are you a Christian? Yeah. That's enough for us. That's enough for us. And so they just approved me. And I was so relieved. Well, so was my daughter. When I got back and I really had to thank her. Because Lord knows what they would have done for me if Maggie hadn't done what she did to me. So.
Well, they knew you answered the question about love right there.
Yes, well, and guts, and lack of shame,
Trusting God. in all
trusting God in all things. And okay, so let's have a word of prayer and then we'll go home. Lord God, thank you so much for giving us this time together and bless us as we go about our work and keep us focused on two things. Keep us focused on you and keep us focused on love. A guy wrote a book that the small things don't matter and they're all small things. Help us to remember that those are the two things that matter. So help us keep those in our focus. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. All right, go home, and I'll see you on Tuesday in 2 weeks.